Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your critique of the week. It's Friday, July 10th. 5 days from the Rattle Poetry Prize deadline. Hope you got your poems ready, polished up, get them in by midnight on Wednesday this week. That's going to be the big $15,000 for a single poem prize. And the way we fund all the things that we do is by the extra money that we get from the Rattle Poetry Prize entry. And entry fee is $30. It includes a one-year subscription to Rattle. That is the regular price. You really can't beat that deal. You win either way. So I'm sure everybody watching here is subscribing through the Rattle Poetry Prize or on his own. But thank you for doing that. You can submit up to 4 poems with that one entry fee. And you have until midnight Eastern time. So make sure you put that on your calendars. But we're going to do a critique of the week right now. Let's see, Darcy's here with 2 poems in the queue, 1 short. D. Coleman's got 2 short poems in the queue too. Right off the bat, why don't we try that? Darcy, though, it's Darcy 228. Put that in the search. Is there a Darcy? Because it shows handles now, not. I think it's Patricia Darcy. We'll assume that's who we're talking to. Who else is here? We got Deb T in the house. Deb T's got 2 as well. Rose Leonard, no poems in the queue, just here to talk about yours. Thanks, Rose. Rose is a great poet. Been an Ekphrastic Challenge winner, been in Rattle before. Let's see, Ashley Newton-Nagel is here. She's got 2 in the queue. I don't think we'll get to those today, but maybe next week, Ashley. Thanks for being here. Dick Westheimer in the house. Poetry Squad member, and a great show we just released on the Poetry Space. An old-fashioned show with a bunch of friends sitting around talking about. Everybody brought like a show and tell, a poem they love. So check that out. That's Katie's show she produces, independent of Rattle, technically. And that is what we like to do. We release it on Fridays. And that show that just came out includes just good talk about good poems with a lot of fun. Joe Barca is there as well, Brian O'Sullivan. And we each brought a poem and talked about the one we wanted to share. So some listening while you're walking the dog or gardening later this weekend. Kimberly Gibson Tran is here. Kathy Borey. We got Mary Keating. Our vid notes. I think that's Rachel Grieve, if I remember right. Chelsea McClellan's here. PMB. All right. Mary Keating. So got a great group of people here. Let me write down before I forget who mentioned that they're here and has poems. So we got Darcy first. Then we had D. Coleman. And Deb T. I hope I can spell Tannenbaum right. And then Ashley Newton-Nagel, if we have time. We'll write that down too. And that's who we'll get to today. Now, as always, and Ashley is under Ashley just N, I think. But as always, what we do in the Critique of the Week is get that workshop experience that is so valuable. Let people know as we go in the comments what's working, what doesn't, where you're running along with the poem, where you get confused, the line breaks or things you trip over, throw you off, little diction things, anything you think of that can help the poet out. That's what we're trying to do here, make the poems as good as we can. And Patricia Darcy has 2 poems like we mentioned. Oh, thanks, Deb. It's Tannenbaum has 2 N's. I knew I was not spelling it right. Okay. I'll write that down, too. Let's see. So, Patricia Darcy from North Carolina. And submittal was going a little slow for me. It has been earlier today, too. Let me try to refresh, get a better connection or something. Okay. There we go. So her first poem's Obituary. Looks sort of demi-sonnet size-ish. Then we have Sleepwalking. So another short poem. Let's take a look at these. Oh, and first, does Deb or Patricia have any questions? No general questions. So if you'd like to participate, I should say, in the Critique of the Week, all you have to do is go to Rattle.com. Up on the contents, you will see Critique of the Week is one of the things. Submit 2 poems there. And then, and if you submit 2 poems there, we'll get to you when you can. And if you're here and you mention that you have 2 poems, you're much more likely for us to go to you. All right, so let's take a look at this Obituary poem. First, this is, once again, Patricia Darcy. Obituary. There it is. Obituary. The salutation, dear, expired without a whimper. It was predeceased by the Dear John letter. Dear was unable to cross the chasm to email, which considers salutation superfluous. Once a hallmark of the handwritten letter, now a nearly extinct artifact, a profound loss to future generations of friends, cousins, and pen pals. a word lovers no longer write. Dear lived in many languages and crossed the ocean tucked into the countless trunk letters. Historic significance of this fading relic was noted in the advice column, Dear Abby. Other survivors include the song Dear Prudence, the business letter, Dear Sir, and the phrase, Dearly Beloved. No calling hours, in lieu of flowers, please buy stationery. So we get a nice sense of rhyme in there at the end, no calling hours, in lieu of flowers, please buy stationery. I think the thing I was thinking as I was reading this poem, I think it's a really cool topic for a poem. Rachel Grieve says, I still use dear in work emails. I do I use them when I don't know the person already. I still say dear if I've never had any interaction. If I had them before, I say hi. And if I keep it's an exchange back and forth, I use no salutation. That is my way of going about it. But I love poems that are sort of odes to things that go away. What's missing here, I think, so Tom Barlow says the turn could be a little stronger when it becomes personal. Yeah, exactly. And as Chelsea McClellan says, a topic I'm interested in, but I keep waiting for it to turn personal or specific. And yeah, exactly. So that's what feels like it's missing in the poem. I think it's a great topic, and it's interesting to explore, the way we forget about things unless they go away. And but I you could go in sort of a surreal, strange direction where the deer is doing things and sort of personifying. I could see it go that way, where you push the topic that you're talking about farther, or as people have suggested here, become personal and why is dear to you? So it's a great idea for a poem that hasn't really pushed itself as far as I think it could. Let me pull up a poem because we love doing sample poems. And this reminds me of a poem by Kate Pepper called "Don't You Miss the Phone Booth?" And we'll just read this poem, and we'll look at the way that the poem comes to life. And I remember I liked it, but that's all I remember. So let's see. Kate Pepper, "Don't you miss the phone booth? A place where once you closed that hinged door, you could still look out. But now the outside world was hushed and you were in a capsule of privacy. The etchings of phone numbers, names, and expletives cheering you while you listened to the dial tone, thinking grandly how connected you were to those who came before you in this one booth. And wasn't it comforting, too, to feel the heft and solidity of the phone book or rub the cigarette burns on the little corner table? In old movies, people excuse themselves in restaurants to make a call, and you, yourself, remember finding the quiet corner near the restrooms, the payphone inside the cubicle just big enough for you to lean in. How good you were at not speaking loudly. How nice it was for folks to stand back waiting for the caller to finish and step away before waking up and putting in the dime. Oh, sure, back then it meant people couldn't reach you 24/7. Photos snapped from your cell at a dinner party couldn't be sent to your loved ones in Zurich, or your preteens' thumbs couldn't get the workout from texting. But hey, wasn't it swell to walk down a city street and the only people you heard talking to themselves were crazy? Driving away from the city, no pop song sound bites rang in your pocket. In the pouring rain, when you miss your turn, so-and-so's cabins, the wipers going like mad, you see a closed gas station and with relief, a sudden feeling of joy, spot the shape of the booth with its panels lit, the unmistakable sign of the phone on top, haloed in light, offering you shelter and connection. Yeah, so in this one, and it's kind of easier with a phone booth because you get there's so much vivid things going on with a phone booth to start with. So you get all those things you use a phone booth. You get to feel the heft of the phone book in there and things like that. So, yeah. And Joanna Poundson, see, this makes me really miss the phone booth. Yeah, it's all those details that bring the phone booth back to life. And then also it does something sort of sneaky where it starts using you and it addresses the reader a little bit. And PMB says, "What's a phone booth?" Yeah, sometimes we see one, and I show the kids, and they're very fascinated with the concept. Let me tell you. But it's interesting how it goes to these personal scenes too, which even though it's saying you and we're addressing a reader a few times, it becomes very personal. Becomes a personal memory. And so you can see that sense of movement in this poem too. So we get to actually re-experience and reappreciate the phone booth through the poem, and then we get to turn to a personal memory too. which makes the sort of nostalgia and the how much we miss it even more pertinent. So with that poem, that's what you do with Don't You Miss the Phone Booth. And for this one, let me get back on screen here. So the question is how he could do that kind of thing. How can he bring the deer to life and then find some way to make the deer personal? Yeah. J. Milton says there are still some phone booths in London. Yeah, Katie and I were in London in just after Christmas, before New Year's, and I think took some pictures with a phone booth. It's like, and we had to wait in line for because everybody wanted a picture with a phone booth. Yeah. Anyway, so there's that. A mention of Doctor Who is obligatory, says Tom Barlow. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So bring the deer to life, somehow, and I think we have the Dear Abby with the Dear Prudence, the Dear Sir, but imagine this. Other survivors include the song Dear Prudence, the business letter Dear Sir, and then say some of a business letter that meant a lot to you or something like that. And it could end, the phrase "dearly beloved" on the funeral card that I was handed when my, mother was laying in wake. Like that kind of make it personal. Yeah. And there's things that actually come up in memories when you talk about the deer and bring those out, and then we'll get to experience them all over again and appreciate it more. Yeah. Mathahikel, Pat Nupu says, I feel like the line breaks could make the poem stronger. And JD Milton says maybe start the poem with deer. Yeah, I mean, I think here a real clear direct address to the deer itself. There's a kind of irony in that works, I think. So there's a lot. It's a great idea for a poem. There's a lot of ways you can go and play and push. And the key word there is play, I think. Play with this concept. See where you can have fun with it. And we haven't mentioned really the title is obituary. I should have come back to that. And so it's it's formatted as an obituary, and that's a frame you can play with and do stuff with too. But I think there's more opportunity than just that. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to the next poem. We'll see what we have here. Sleepwalking. This is another short poem. The skinnier, more line breaks. Oh, and we mentioned, I think, I was going to say, somebody mentioned the line breaks here, the lines being long. It's because it's trying to look like a prose poem, so it could be an actual obituary. I think that was the idea for that. And I don't know, there's just, that could work, but it's not vivid enough. I think there's a real, it's a difficulty. It's sort of swimming uphill with the deer itself as a concept, not having a lot of details you can grab onto. And so having that and also the structure of the obituary column sort of limiting you to, there's just it's more difficult to come up with something that's really concrete with it. So I think take some different turns and then play with it. A different frame. Yeah. Okay, let's take a look at the other one now. Sleepwalking. I am a cloak called memory, each stitch a distant whisper. My life floats on gossamer wings with rips and tears. When I fall, the veil between asleep and awake dissolves. Disjointed fragments flood my brain. Odd juxtapositions confuse and amuse. The orange alley cat winks and turns green. Crochet crawls in continuous loops across the bottom of my dream screen. Memory lane expands into yarn ever-changing, my body an old puzzle with warped and missing pieces. No angels in the night rescue me. When a shadow intrudes, hope threads the needle. So that's very interesting. So I think the poem starts out kind of slow, but I love that the second half really picks up and becomes sort of strange and interesting. And there's a nice, whoever before mentioned that the lines were too long in the last poem. There's sort of a way that short lines fit the voice, I think. Terry Jude Miller says, puzzle and metaphor is great. Kimberly Gibson translated like the near rhyme on veil and dissolves. Okay, so let's read it again a little more slowly. Sleepwalking. I am a cloak called memory, each stitch a distant whisper. Yeah, and so it's starting out a little bit vague. There's really nothing I'm a cloak called memory. It's kind of it's interesting. But then each stitch a distant whisper. I don't know. It's sort of how do I put it? It's like it could be anything, so it's nothing. Almost like it just doesn't have the same kind of resonance. It doesn't feel concrete. It doesn't feel tangible there. So a cloak called memory, then if you could feel the memory, but a distant whisper sort of leaves it hanging there. Yeah. My life floats on gossamer wings, and gossamer wings are one of those things. It's sort of a cliched use of that word with rips and tears. And then I tripped over this tears because that is one of the things that it's a homophone. And when it's two different words and there's not a really clear context, sometimes the reader reads them wrong. So you have to be aware of that as a writer too, when page is the primary point of consumption. When I fall, the veil between sleep and wake dissolves. And so that's still not a whole lot of really concrete painting the scene, letting us feel we're there imagery. As Terry Jude Miller says, first 13 lines could be cut. Yeah. I don't know how many. I didn't count down 13, but that's what we're getting at here. Disjointed fragments flood my brain, and flood my brain's kind of a cliche. Odd juxtapositions confuse and amuse. And again, that's not really saying much. So these lines at the top, and I don't know how far 13 down is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. There you go. But then it picks up. And why not jump in right here? I agree with Terry. The orange alley cat winks and turns green. I mean, why? Sleepwalking. Like you're sleepwalking. Or sleepwaking, I should say. I think I probably said walking every time. Sleepwaking. Sorry. But sleepwaking is the title. And then the orange alley cat winks and turns green. Crochet crawls in continuous loops across the bottom of my dream screen. So we have nice, here it's just so much more vivid. It's not just that it's unusual, but the descriptions are something that feel real and interesting and hold our attention. Memory lane expands into yarn ever-changing. My body an old puzzle with warped and missing pieces. No angels in the night rescue me. When a shadow intrudes, hope threads the needle. And this is interesting. When a shadow intrudes, hope threads the needle. And, you would say threads the needle is a kind of cliche phrase, but when you're using it in an interesting, different way, it works. And that's just an unusual thing to say, when a shadow intrudes. And it makes me really wonder what that shadow is that's intruding. Dick Westheimer suggests, doing this for 8 years, I've said so many things over and over and over again. But yeah, the problem with a cliche is that it's already been chunked in your brain. It's a metaphor, a simile, or something that has been. You hear it so many times that you no longer actually hear it. You hear it for the sign becomes the signified. Like it's already that thing as a unit. And what we wanted to do is have new sort of connections and images and ideas be flashing in our brain. And that's like a sort of a constellation and all the stars in your neurons that is already fired a whole bunch of times. And so when you get that, it's just, it comes off as flat and uninteresting and doesn't spark. We always use these same kind of words because there's an electrical thing to it. It doesn't spark your imagination because the stuff is already clumped together. So, and Terry says it's a cliche is a click or attack in an automobile tire. Click, click, click. And it's sort of, it's sort of not really that. I mean, I think we hear them because we're looking out to avoid them. And so they stand out, in crowds among poets. But the problem is actually that they don't create anything interesting and new to your brain. I mean, it's like a scene that you've seen before so many times. It's like, I guess a good analogy would be, it's like if you drive the same path to work every day, you end up daydreaming the whole way without actually seeing anything that you see on your drive. It's that kind of thing. If you're doing something, you get lost in it because you've seen it so many times that you don't really see it. And that's really the problem with cliches, is that we don't actually see them for what they are and how interesting they actually could be because we've seen them so many times before. And so that's why you want to use fresh language, because then we'll actually see the thing that you're saying, and that has an impact. Okay. So, yeah, Mary Keating says, find the places in the poem where you are showing us and expand on those places, delete the rest. Yeah, and that's just great advice. So we move through, and we point out the things that are great, and I think we could... Yeah, Danette Burmia says, is the speaker crocheting in their sleep or crocheting instead of sleeping? Yeah, it's interesting. And I think maybe it's like, and I think that could be built out a little bit more. So, but my interpretation maybe is that somebody is, falling asleep while crocheting, and that ends up turning into their dream and sort of like that weird, you're half asleep, half dreaming kind of state. But I think... where was it that... Beth Moore here says, I think the poem is suffering from a lack of clarity. What is trying to be said? Yeah, exactly. It's, again, similar to the last poem. It hasn't pushed into what it's really exploring. There's an interesting setup. The idea of sleep-waking here, the images that come about in that sort of muddled in-between state. And then there's a strange thing with a shadow intruding. But what is the shadow? Like, I just want to know more about this poem. Yeah. Yeah. So what is the poet trying to... So in both poems, we want to push... They're good ideas. They're good starting places for poems. But again, take that image, take that idea, take the thing that you're working out, and play with it on the page. See where it can take you. Surprise yourself. It's like the start. They're both really good starts to poems. It's just a matter of seeing where these starts to the poems take you. And I think we need to keep going farther and keep along this journey until we get to some, something that... There's a reason why every poem wants to exist. Like, there's a reason that your subconscious mind is trying to tell you something that you haven't really figured out yet. And that's really why we make art and poems, because of the way language is so central to humanity. Is a primary way that we do that we explore our world by turning everything into, objects we can contain and understand and model. And language is the way we do that, and creative language and play with language is how we learn new things. And so there's something that you're trying to learn. There's some problem you're trying to solve, something you're trying to understand that compels you to write a poem when you're writing it towards something. And figuring out what that was is like the next step, and you kind of sort of work and play at it and surprise yourself and let your mind wander and, see what is the end of that. I think it was Billy Collins in his interview in Rattle says that he feels like when he's writing a poem like a bloodhound, and he catches the whiff of a scent, and then he follows the trail along, and the poem is the trail that he, the bloodhound, follows just to see what's at the end of it. And that's the kind of way you have to approach a poem to be successful and have a sense of moving and being that kind of magic spell that conjures a world and then takes us somewhere new and somewhere that we want to remember and we enjoy the journey. It has to be a journey. It has to be like that scent trail. And so you've got sort of both these poems. There's like the finding of the scent, but we got to keep going through the brush and seeing what's around the next corner. And I think there's going to be something interesting there in both of them. We just have to keep wandering and figuring out where that trail goes. So good starts to poems, but let's keep pushing ourselves and surprising ourselves as we go. Yes, Terry Jude Miller says 90% of the poems I start in one direction and end in another. Yeah. Yeah, and Young Hegelian says Dean Young would talk about listening to what the poem is trying to tell him instead of talking over the poem. And yeah, that's exactly... I never heard that quote from Dean Young, but that's what I talk about all the time with Zen and the Art of Archery being writing advice, is, you have a much too willful will, that sense of you're overwriting, you're wrestling with what you want the poem to be instead of letting what happens. You have a much too willful will. You think that what you do not do yourself will not happen. And yeah. Okay. So anyway, let's move on. Hope that was helpful. Thanks so much. Again, that was Patricia Darcy from North Carolina sharing those poems. Let me make a little note so that I know we did them, and then we'll go to the next put up, which is D. Coleman. Nice to get to D. Coleman, who has been here critiquing and helping people for a very long time. And again, Submittable is, I don't know, I doubt that Rattle is a big enough impact on Submittable to slow things down. So it's probably just their server somewhere, or their like Amazon Web Service that like houses the actual things, but it's being slow, so bear with me. Although I did 1 year with the Rattle Poetry Prize, I remember like maybe 5 years ago or so, Submittable wasn't prepared for the onslaught of the 2 hours before the deadline at the peak, and actually did crash. And that's the one time Rattle extended a deadline, because literally people were trying to submit, and Submittable was overwhelmed and crashed and didn't work for a while. So we gave everybody an extra day. Then that's the only time we extend deadlines, though. We are people of our word. And so when there's a deadline, we actually have the deadline. When we say we're going to announce a winner on a certain day, we do. And so be prepared and get your poems in. Anyway, okay, so here's D. Coleman, a very familiar face in the chat from Wisconsin. Did not know that. And then DS, this last year was a hard one. I struggle with endings in life and in my poetry. Would ending late in autumn on the penultimate line work better? Good question. And in my one remaining dog, I'm wondering if my last line is an altogether wrong analogy. What I meant was that I felt that both my dog and I were resigned to facing the end of her life. Okay, well, let's take a look at this. And here's in late in autumn by D. Coleman. I pull out the old zinnia stalks, and a billion ants in crisis scurry to carry their white eggs to safety. One of my dogs can barely walk. She's 14 and off her food, so I cook her ground turkey with rice. I make a sling to help her up and down the 5 steps to the garden. We manage, but it's hard. Hard, too, to know when to call the vet and to know if I'm doing it for her or for me. Last night, I slept beside her on the kitchen floor. The ants have moved to a new and secret place. I hope I don't disturb them again, but if it happens, they will know exactly why. What to do, and they will do it without the burden of thought. Today, I would like to be an ant. This is Late in Autumn, again by D. Coleman. So my first thought, and we'll see what everybody feels like this. What if instead of late in autumn, and maybe, that is very traditional for poems to do, or pieces of literature, harkens to the season as a way of expressing sort of the end of life theme early. You know, that, what Thomas Hardy called it, where his weather was always like matching the character's emotions. You know, it's that kind of thing. And I'm getting so far from high school that I can't remember these terms anymore. But the objective correlative, is that what it was called? Anyway, so there's that. But my first thought is to make, what if we made the title, Today I Would Like to Be an Ant? And then we could end on this line. And I think that might work better. I think that's really what the poem wants to do. But let me see. So what if we called it, instead of late in autumn, what if we said, Today I would like to be an ant? I pull out the old zinnia stalks, and a billion ants in crisis scurry to carry their white eggs to safety. So I think that's an interesting lead-in. It gets that concept in, but long enough for you kind of forget it, the title, and so it's a very pleasing thing when you come back to read the title. I think that works nicely. I should say, too, I like this first line a lot. I pull out the old zinnia stalks, and a billion ants in crisis scurry to carry their white eggs to safety. You know, there's we talk about sometimes about adjectives being a weaker sort of way to add to a poem. But here's an example of a great adjective, because you see the dirt, which is sort of dark, of course, and having them not be eggs, but white eggs, you see them really clearly because of that, and it fits the rhythm really nicely, too. So it's a great use of an adjective there. And colors a lot of times annoy me in poems, but when they're important, they really work well, and I think that's a great example. Yeah. So, strong for stanza, says Deb T. So I like that a lot. And if we started, I think Today I Would Like to Be an Ant, I think that works. Anyway, one of my dogs can barely walk. She's 14 and off her food, so I cook her ground turkey with rice. And again, very simple, direct statements nice. The line breaks, the lines have a rhythm to them. The line breaks feel like it's intentional. They help the reading be natural. So very nicely done throughout on this poem. Sorry, I'm trying to get the size right. That's better. Oops. Yeah. I make a sling to help her up and down the 5 steps to the garden. We manage, but it's hard. Hard, too, to know when to call the vet and to know if I'm doing it for her or for me. Last night I slept beside her on the kitchen floor. The ants have moved to a new and secret place. I hope I don't disturb them again, but if it happens, they will know exactly what to do, and they will do it without the burden of thought. And then you look back up, and it was, today I would like to be an ant. I think that works a lot better. Yeah. Yeah, Timberlake says, great clear reportage. Yeah. Yeah, Holly York says, it's such a great, graceful treatment of the situation. I usually can't take poems about dogs too close. Yeah. And Rose Leonard says, anyone who has lost a pet will relate to the quandary about prolonging life, but this also means you need to find ways to keep it fresh and not too expected, which I think he does by focusing on the ants. Let's see. So let's take a look at some maybe more technical and close details, since it's a really nice poem. I mean, it's very clear. We know what's going on. We feel it emotionally. It has an interesting angle. It has a memorable sort of hook with the ants. Terry Judy Miller says, does the hard repetition work? And let's look at that. That is one thing I was thinking about. So I make a sling for her up and down the 5 steps to the garden. We manage, but it's hard. Hard, too, to know when to call the vet and to know if I'm doing it for her or for me. That works to me. I think the repetition is good there. I think it does. Though I guess the one thing that I was thinking about was hard to know when to call the vet and know if I'm doing. I guess it's the no. The repetition of that no makes the sentence feel a little bit clunky. And I think that there's a way that sentence, hard to know when to call the vet and to know if I'm doing it for her or for me. I wanted to, in my mind, I wanted to maybe switch it and keep the sentences short. So what if we were like, we manage, but it's hard. Hard to know when to call the vet. Am I doing it for her or for me? Like, what if it turned to a question inward? And then we get the way our thoughts kind of sort of both wander and loop at the same time, that sense, and you kind of talk to yourself a little bit, and it cleans up the syntax there. So maybe that would clean up that line. Let me see some other comments, but I think that's my main advice, that title change. Oh, and Deb T already said the same thing. Yeah, am I doing it for her or for me? Yeah, good call, Deb. PMB says, why 2? The 2 is because they're different things that are hard. So manage going up and down the steps is hard, but it's also hard to know when to call the vet. So those are 2 separate things. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I think there's 2 changes, and the poem works really well. And you can see, that D. Coleman's here thinking about poems all the time, making making clear poems with actual emotional energy. I'm sure this is publishable somewhere for sure, Yeah, Mary Keating says, I like the contrast between the uniqueness of the dog and how common all the ants are. Yeah. And I like without the burden of thought, and thinking of thought as a burden, where the ants they have such a burden, but they don't have to think about it. They think in the collective, which is a fascinating thing too. Yeah. Yeah, so it's a very nice poem. Let's take a look at the other one, and maybe we'll have room for 3 poets this week. Thanks for sharing that. It was Late in Autumn by D. Coleman. And the other one is this. My one remaining dog has dementia, so still the same. And yeah, I can definitely relate to this too. I don't know if and some shows back in the day, my Henry, a huge 120-pound German Shepherd, would be on the floor. I don't know how often you'd see him, but he ended up having seizures at the end, and every time he'd have a seizure, he'd sort of lose more of his memory and understanding of what was going on. It got a little bit scary toward the end because he wouldn't recognize you for a moment, which was a little frightening for a 120-pound dog. Anyway, my one remaining dog has dementia. The circles grow tighter as Poe loops through rooms that carry an amalgam of our scents. Bear's been gone 3 months now. We 3, companions for a mere dozen years. Poe stares at walls and gets stuck in corners and shivers in the top of stairs. She walks in lemniscate, a figure 8, winding always to her left like a backward clock as time slips a leash over us. When finally she settles for the night, rests her heavy boxer head on a pillow, I recount for her the story of the rescue and adoption life of Bear and Poe, my finer than fine girls, and in tandem, like a bad poker hand, we fold. Well, again, a very touching poem. I think both these poems work really well. This one I think has more... There's more great lines in this one, and also sort of more clunkiness that could be cleaned out. So I think this sort of has a higher potential, but there's some stuff that I would edit a little bit more. And as Ayana Anderson says, I love the backward clock as time slips a leash over us. Yeah, that's beautiful. And Kimberly Gibson Tran pointed out too. I love that line to the point where I thought for a moment, like, oh, could the poem end here? But I like it extending too. So it's really good stuff. So my one remaining dog has dementia, and that's one of the things we talk about all the time. Setting up, knowing where we are. We're never lost in the poem, and so we get to appreciate the emotion. It's a great example of how giving us that detail, the context up front, lets us connect. We don't. D. Coleman here is not holding the story back. He's letting us know the story so we can feel the story along with him, and that's really how poetry works on people when it's not, academic prestige economy. My one remaining dog has dementia. The circles grow tighter as Poe loops through rooms that carry an amalgam of our scents. So that's nice. Bear's been gone 3 months now. We 3, companions for a mere dozen years. So I think this is a weaker. We 3, companions for a mere dozen years. There's a difficulty just talking about sort of some books and things where there are like too many characters. It's hard to keep track of them, and it makes it like the dogs are this old. I wonder. One of the things I wonder is if maybe. Even though it's true, we have Bear and Poe. Would the poem be stronger only focusing on Poe? So we don't have to have that keeping track of everybody. But so Bear's been gone 3 months now. We 3, companions for a mere dozen years. I don't know. Having just Bear's been gone 3 months now. Maybe it's adding. I don't know. I'm wondering how we could say that in a cleaner way. It just feels a little clunky and a little bit hard to follow for a second to me. Poe stares at walls and gets stuck in corners and shivers at the top of stairs. Because the poem is not a poem that does that. This repetition of stairs and stairs sort of clunks in my ear. It's two different. Again, we're having homophones, and this time, the opposite sort of issue with homophones is that you hear the word twice and it sort of calls too much attention to itself. And so I would probably use a different word for stairs here, because I use stairs here, and it just gets to be a little too much. Like it just stands out too much because we hear. We have all these neural bundles that train us to listen for rhyme. And so when we hear rhyme, it stands out, and it makes those words stand out more than they really should in a poem that's written in this way, which is this intimate, direct voice. So anyway, she walks in lemniscate, a figure 8. And that's a word I'm going to have to look up. I assume it means figure 8. Yeah, that's interesting. A mathematical curve shaped like a figure 8 or infinity symbol. Lemniscate. And it's defined right after it, and that's what I thought it was you were doing. She walks in lemniscate, a figure 8, winding, and it's got that nice rhyme to it. So I don't mind that it's a word that I don't know because I liked that I just got to learn it, and it doesn't get out of the way of the music of the poem. Winding always to her left like a backward clock as time slips a leash over us. And that is just inspired. That is a great line, a great metaphor there. And as you know, we talk about sometimes with the Neil Postman Award for Metaphor, it's hard to find great metaphors and similes in poems. It's you'd think they'd be all over the place, and they're really not that common. So really great metaphor there. When she finally settles for the night, rests her heavy boxer head in a pillow, I recount for her the story of the rescue and adoption and life of Bear and Poe, my finer than finer girls. So again, like the other section, this part feels clunky and it's sort of like there's too much to describe and you're trying to be really concise about it. And I still do think, rereading the poem again, that maybe just focusing on Poe, even though, for the actual story that you're telling, that the two dogs are intertwined and their lives are very important together. But for us, reading and trying to understand and have empathy is, poems are empathy machines. That's what they're trying to do, is make us feel. It might be a better use of the words on the page to just focus on Poe. And I wonder if we could do that. And then I think that would maybe make the poem work better. Because this section does feel a little bit like, I guess clunky is not the right word, but you go into this voice where you have to explain things. And it stops being like a poem in someone's voice and more like an essay, sort of like pointing out little details, and I don't know, it loses some of the music. But then I like and in tandem, like a bad poker hand, we fold. I think that's a nice ending. So that's my advice. I wonder what, I've been talking without really looking at the comments. So let's see. Yeah, Terry loves this poem. Yeah. And Beth says the same thing. Mention of Bear, feel only significant for the writer, but don't hold the value for the reader. Yeah. And Young Hegelian says, I think it should end on the line, as time slips a leash over us. We don't really need it. Bookended with the other dogs. Great poem. Yeah, that was my other suggestion. I don't know if I said it out loud, but yeah, we could just end in that line. D, I don't know if you're familiar, D, with Jack Riddle. But your voice sounds similar. I think you'd enjoy Jack's poems. He was on a Rattlecast once. He's a Michigan poet. One of the books I really enjoy. It's one of the books that when I'm sort of in a bad mood about poetry, I like to go back and look at, because he's very authentic and honest and straightforward in a way that reminds me that people can do that. His book, Practicing to Walk Like a Heron. It might be a book you might like, just as a suggestion. But anyway, it sort of feels in that kind of style, like Jack, and I like that. And I think it could end with a leash too. I think it's a great line, and it'd be a nice, tight, concise poem. Yeah. Winston Munn says, I think it needs both dogs to increase the sense of loss. Yeah, and then that's the other option, is to sort of bring more, make Bear. Make Bear is interesting in the descriptions of Bear as Poe. And so you could expand the poem and sort of make both dogs fit in a way that we sort of get to see both dogs. But here, it's sort of like Bear and Bear passed away first, so it's an afterthought kind of, or not as present in the moment. But maybe we could go back to some of the things Bear did and bring that, or maybe it seems like you have a few poems about this, and he said it's been a rough year. Maybe combine a poem about Bear with this poem and have them both be, one poem together. So there's a lot of options for this. Yeah. Oh, and a good point too. Deb T says the title does let you know this is a second loss, because the title is My Only Remaining Dog, not just My Only Dog. So we do know that too. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on and see. So good poems, Dee. Thanks so much for sharing them. Let's move on and see what Deb T's got for us. And it's okay. Backyard and enough. Let's see. We have 10 or 15 minutes to take a look at these. A little bit longer, the first one. Second one's pretty short, just going by the skinny lines. Okay. General questions. What works and what doesn't? How's the voice of these? For the backyard poem, I was playing with the sounds and rhythms of language, includes sprinkling in some unusual word choices. So let's keep an eye on that. On enough, I'm struggling with the difficulty of putting things into words, so they come from different places. How is that plating? Okay, let's take a look. Backyard, Colorado, with alchemy and cushions. Here we go. Backyard, Colorado, with alchemy and cushions. My hips hurt too much to sit in this chair. The damn rheumatism, the aging plaid. I'm lost in sight. Michael chases my mislaid glasses while I retrace the honey trail that steered me here long ago. I was a young waitress in the big city. Another waitress, call her Phoebe, told me her breasts were noticeably lopsided. So that I noticed. She lit a cigarette, looked at me in the eye, and said, "You don't fit the East Coast vibe. You belong to Colorado." That haunted me like a banana fortune-telling my future. I buried it, but it grew, came true. I moved west to Bison and Buttes, to Michael and music. Thundering rains, widening veins, changes that vibrate and play the didgeridoo. That coyote you into a world you never knew, splash you off the map onto back roads, dirt roads, the circular roads to cups. Cups brimming with zeal for new loves, new blunders, for new crystals of salt and sulfur. Cups that spilled me into this backyard with this brass tuba, this bright scent of air and vast view of blue. This life of mountains and rivers and boots, of pulsing, foot-stomping sunshine that almost stops your heart. I can't put it into coffins. I hate the thought of not living here. I am in my sled, praise be to Phoebe. I see the gloss of her long blonde hair, her mismatched pear. She was so young collie. Did she ever quit smoking? Or cast the other spells? Is she still breathing? We were 20. Now it's November. 7 withered leaves shimmy on the apple tree, spent yellow curling into cinnamon. Yeah, so MSMWB says some lovely imagery, but feels somewhat disjointed. So I love the parts where Phoebe, the waitress, I love that. I love the directness, where it's feeling that way. My hips hurt too much to sit in this chair. The damn rheumatism, the aging plaid. I'm lost in sight. Michael chases my mislaid glasses while I trace the honey trail that steered me here long ago. And then, so I like that, that works. We're in the scene. Then we go to the memory. I was a young waitress in the big city. Another waitress. I don't know if I'd go call her Phoebe. Maybe just let her be Phoebe, even if it's not true. Told me her breasts were noticeably lopsided. So then I noticed. And I like that detail, because it's like that I noticed once it's pointed out, applying to the East Coast vibe too. I mean, she lit a cigarette, looked me in the eye, and said, "You don't fit the East Coast vibe. You belong to Colorado." And I like that haunted me like a banana foretelling my future. Now, I don't know how... somebody said, is the banana... Yeah, Dry Montito says, why does the banana foretell the future? And yeah, it feels like something I don't understand, like a reference I don't get or something, like a banana foretelling my future. Is there a game where the banana... you use like a spin the banana that tells the future or something, or the reading a banana like a tea leaf or something? I don't know. I feel like there's something just it's referencing that I don't know. That's how I felt about it too. Although I like the strangeness of it. It's interesting, but maybe, like a banana foretelling my future, and then describe how the banana is used to tell your future or something like that. Yeah, but the beginning is good. I would like a little bit of description about the banana, but otherwise I like that. Then I buried it and it grew and came true. And so that too makes me think there's something about the banana. So maybe I'd like to just see more so I understand what that means, but it's interesting. And then I moved west to Bison and Buttes, to Michael and music. And then the problem here for me is it becomes this sort of explanatory description of being in Colorado, and then the rhymes come in sort of too hard. They're sort of driving the poem forward. And I think instead of I moved west to Bison and Buttes to Michael and music. Instead of like listing, maybe go back into storytelling mode a little bit and about how you ended up coming to Colorado. I don't know. It feels just too I don't know, like it's like summarizing the Colorado section to me and relying too much on the rhyme. So thundering rains, widening veins, changes that vibrate the play the didgeridoo, that coyote you, it's, even though I like coyote you as a good verb, it's fun. But into a world you never knew, splash you off the map out onto back roads, dirt roads, the circular roads to cups brimming with zeal for new loves. Like, see how general these descriptions are? Like I'm not seeing Colorado. I'm seeing the sort of descriptors of Colorado, the summary of it. Prosy as well, says Terry Jude Miller. So it just loses this sort of sense of itself. Cups brimming with zeal for loved ones, new blenders, new crystals of salt and sulfur. Cups that spilled me into the backyard with this brass tuba. I like the brass tuba. So once that gets there in the backyard, my ears perk up a little bit after all this sort of, detached summary. We get a little bit of something unique with the brass tuba, this bright scent of air and vast view of blue. But then we kind of go back. This life of mountains and rivers and boots. So again, we're just sort of listing things of pulsing, foot-stomping sunshine that almost stops your heart. Sort of like a summary and a tourist guide at that point. I can't put into coffins. So again, this gets interesting again, but the coffins is a surprising turn. I hate the thought of not living here. And so right here, when we get the eye back and we get the direct speaker back, then the poem sort of comes back to life. So really, to me, it's like this section, here, kind of the poem fades out and then it comes back to life again. That almost stops your heart. I can't put it into coffins. I hate the thought of not living here. I'm in my sled. Praise be to Phoebe. I see the gloss of her blonde hair. And so again, we get the eye, we get the storytelling a little bit more. We get to see Phoebe, and it's starting to work again. I see the gloss of her hair, her long blonde hair, her mismatched hair. She was so young, Collie. Did she ever quit smoking? So that's an interesting question. Or cast other spells? Is she still breathing? We were 20. Now it's November. 7 withered leaves shimmy on the apple tree, spent yellow curling into cinnamon. And it's an interesting image to end on, too. Yeah. Yeah. As Rachel Grieve says, needs a Colorado story to parallel the Phoebe story. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's it. So it's got a hollowed out midsection. It needs to be filled up with another story, I think. And Kimberly Gibson Trent says it could be the banana at the end. Yeah, I kind of forgot about that whole detail. We could use some understanding the banana. We could shift to the banana, and maybe that does something. I don't think a banana would grow in Colorado, but I could be wrong. I mean, I'm not a gardener or farmer. Okay. Well, anyway, let's take a look at the other poem while we have some time. It's Enough. You ask how my mom is. I run around my mind, try to find a good enough reply. Might as well say how twilight is, or winter, or the ocean. If I showed you my unmown fields, you'd see wind worrying and worshipping the tall grass. Herds of words gallop away, leave my feet cuffed in bindweed. My brother makes a video of her, sends it to me. She sits in a sturdy armchair, wearing a pale pink nightgown in her room at dementia care, and bends towards him. Says, I'm so happy you're here. I don't know you'd be here. He says, I didn't know either. It's a surprise. She points to 2 Mother's Day cards propped up on the windowsill. See, I have this is pretty and that is pretty. He asks, what do they say? What do they say? I don't know. You want to read them? No, she smiles. I can see them. So that the ending is very sweet. I like this ending. Do you want to read them? No, she smiles. I can see them. And I wonder, today's poem on Rattle.com is a great example of a teeny tiny poem that really works. I love this poem. It's so touching. And it's just these lines. So the title sets the whole thing up. It's Danielle de Corcho on using my sister's name in example sentences in my English class. So the whole thing, I'm using my sister's name in example sentences in my English class. We get the whole sort of background there with that long title and the Chinese style. And then I erase the board and the world continues without you. And that's it. That's the whole poem. And it's a beautiful, poignant poem because of that, because it's so simple and says so much. And I get the same kind of feeling about this poem here, you know? I mean, what if this poem could be a long title that sort of sets the stage a little bit? And then the whole poem could be, he asks, you want to read them? Or you want me to read them? And she says, no. She smiles. I can see them. Something like that could really work. I mean, I don't know exactly how you do it, but that feels really a strong heart of a poem. Let's see. But let's take a look more. So enough. You ask how my mom is. I run around my mind, try to find a good enough reply. Might as well say how twilight is, or winter, or the ocean. So I like this concept. Already, if I was keeping the poem and not doing that suggestion of making it a super, super tiny poem, I would maybe title it, You Ask How My Mom Is. I think that could work as a title. Get rid of this enough, which is not really doing it. I think we're it's sort of hinting at what's going to come at the end, like seeing them as enough, and that's just not really enough to be memorable. But we could set the stage and sort of not feel like it's taking part of the poem to do so by calling it "You Ask How My Mom Is," and then I think and then we can cut this too and just get more to the heart of it. So title: You Ask How My Mom Is. I try to find a good enough reply. Might as well say how twilight is, or winter, or the ocean, because I like that thought a lot. Might as well say how twilight is. That's really cool. If I showed you my unmown fields, you'd see wind worrying the worshipping the tall grass. Now that sounds very nice. I like that a lot. So, that works well. Herds of words gallop away, leave me my feet cuffed in bindweed. So I think this is a really cool image. It sort of sits there strangely, and I think my impulse would be to let it. It's one of the things I wish I did more in my own poems nowadays. I feel like when I was younger, I'd make leaps more and let them sort of just sit there. And I think maybe I get a little too clear sometimes. But I think, just going to this and letting it be keeps it stronger and stranger. And in this, herds of words, because we're suddenly personifying the words as herds galloping, I think that's too much and takes away some of the mystery of it. I would just cut this line. My brother makes a video of her, sends it to me. She sits in a sturdy armchair wearing a pale pink nightgown. In her room is dementia care and bends towards him. Says, I'm so happy you're here. I don't know you'd be here. And so the dialogue here just isn't as strong. Yeah. And so the poem sort of is weakened with the dialogue here. So I don't know. I think you just cut this part and just say, my brother makes a video of her, sends it to me. She points to 2 Mother's Day cards propped on the windowsill. See, I have this. See, I have. This is pretty and that is pretty. He asks, what do they say? I don't know, or I'm trying to think of how you could clean it up and speed it up, but I like where it goes though. Jenny Middleton says, I like the ending of this poem that explores the deeper connotations of seeing and reading and their contrast. Yeah. So anyway, I think there's a lot of ways you could play with it. Like I've suggested a bunch. I think you cut out the stuff that's weaker and either have it be a super short poem. Like the poem could be, she points to 2 Mother's Day cards propped on the windowsill is the title. And then we just have a little bit of this as clean and clear as possible. I think that would work as a great, tight, short, tiny poem. Or we could do that, what I was saying here, and just clean out the dialogue. Yeah. Montito says, is it unfair to expect a dementia patient to speak strong dialogue? It's unfair to expect us to want to read it. And so if the dialogue, there's ways. I haven't done this one in a while. So long I can't remember what the title is. Oh, geez. It's a Creeley. What? It was Robert Creeley, the one where he's drunk. I used to bring this one up all the time because it's a fun use of dialogue. Is it I Know a Man? Sorry, it's been a bit. I Know a Man. Is that right? Yeah, here we go. So it's I Know a Man by Robert Creeley. Interviewed in Rattle, I think, like 12 or something way back in the day. So I Know a Man. And this is like, he's drunk, so the dialogue is stilted, but watch how it works. I know a man. As I said to my friend, because I am always talking, John, I said, which was not his name. The darkness surrounds us. What can we do against it? Or else shall we, and why not buy a goddamn big car? Drive, he said. For Christ's sake, look out where you're going. And I love that poem. So if we're going to do dementia, make the dialogue interesting, like the drunk dialogue here. You wouldn't want to actually listen to a drunk person rambling, but the way it's formed in this poem makes it compelling speech. And you could do the same thing for the dialogue from a dementia patient, but instead we have, and one of the pieces of advice from a novelist, I didn't take very many, fiction writing classes, but Janet Fitch, who's been a guest in the Rattlecast because she's a huge fan of rattle and poetry, she advises to use just as little dialogue as possible, and only when there's something specific about the speaker's voice that you want to be heard. So the dialogue should only be something about the way they say it. And if there's not something special about the way they say it, just paraphrase, because dialogue gets really boring for a reader. Especially when it's like naturally the way we actually talk. Because if you take a transcript of how we usually talk in conversation, it's really boring dialogue. Holly York says, did Rattle publish the Creeley poem? No, we didn't publish the Creeley poem. That's a famous poem that he wrote in the 60s, I think, or so. There's an interview with Robert Creeley in issue number 19. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, I think those are the advice, and we're past the hour. Thanks everybody for being here. It's nice to have poems from people who are here and listen to the critique of the week themselves, because then you get poems that have substance and have, real strengths and real storytelling that you can get behind and understand what's going on and enjoy and appreciate, and then talk more in depth about it. So thanks to all three of the poets we looked at today. That last one, of course, was Deb Tannenbaum from Colorado, as we know from that first poem. And that's going to wrap up the critique for this week. So thanks, everybody. Once again, just a reminder, if you jumped in late, the Rattle Poetry Prize deadline is this Wednesday. That's only 5 days away. So make sure you get your entries in. That's how we fund everything that we do. So we really appreciate it. If you entered once, feel free to enter more poems. You're just contributing to both your subscription length in print, which is great, and also, we make about $10 per that 30 that doesn't go toward the award or the actual fulfillment of the subscription. So each entry we get, it's like $10 we can spend on doing other things, like having Poet Respond and Submittable and a daily poem by email, which, believe it or not, costs about $10,000 a year, because we have so many people in our subscription logs or whatever that we could meme out to. So anyway, there's a lot of expenses that go into it. The new website, a whole lot of stuff all over the place. In addition to printing your magazines and paying all the poets we publish is a big one, of course. All that stuff comes from that $10 extra that each contest entry gives us. So we encourage people to write and read poetry in the process, even if they come kicking and screaming. That's another part of the contest. You get a subscription, even if you only entered because you wanted to enter a contest and win, you still sort of have this thing arriving, and maybe you'll read it, and maybe you'll get better and appreciate poetry more. That's the whole idea. So anyway, support us by doing that. I think that's enough for rambling about it. Oh, but I could put the picture up. Oh, there's the Rattle Poetry Prize picture. So pretty. Anyway, that's the coming up on Wednesday. Now, in the meantime, though, we have this week's guest, who is going to be, I actually slid. Okay, next week's guest is going to be Lisa Baird. So Lisa Baird, a slam poet, activist. Her newest book is When Whales Went Back to the Water. It was a finalist for the Julie Suk Award this year. You might have noticed that we have a bunch of finalists for the Julie Suk Award. That's because I happened to see a list of the finalists and said, hey, there's a bunch of poets that we published not too long ago, and they have books I didn't realize, so I'll invite them on. So Lisa Baird's another one of those, and it should be fun talking to her, of course, about performing your poems, very important, all the important topics she talks about in her book, When Whales Went Back to the Water. Beautiful sounds in that title, too. That's your guest for Rattlecast number 350. The prompt for everybody was to take a Rattle Poetry Prize finalist from the first year that you heard about Rattle. So for me, it has to be the first year, even though I already knew about Rattle because I invented the contest. But for anybody else, the first year you heard about Rattle, figure out what year that was, and write a poem that quotes a line from one of the finalists from that year. Okay, so that's what you're going to do. You can use it in epigraph. You can put it as a line in the poem, hopefully italicized so we know what it is or something like that. Whatever you want to do, use a poem that quotes a line from one of those finalists from the year you found out about Rattle. That is your prompt for this week. That is your show for this week. Hope you have a great weekend. In the meantime, I should have put on the music so I could, while we were rambling. Hang on. There we go. Anyway, that is going to wrap up the show for today. Thanks for watching. Hope you have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you later. Goodbye.